You're listening to The White Rabbit, conversations on the art of presenting in a rather noisy world. Your hosts are Matt Krause and Alper Rozanes. Matt helps leaders of international companies speak, write, and present with confidence. Alper is a communications trainer and a startup investor with a diverse portfolio of companies in Barcelona. If you like this podcast, please share it with friends and colleagues. Now, on to Matt and Alper for today's conversation.
Alper, I was doing some thinking recently. Surprise, surprise.
Surprise. Wow.
Yeah, surprise, surprise. It's something that I do occasionally. And you know how a couple weeks ago we had a guest on the show, Brad Ferris.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And he talked about the concept of self-leadership. And I was kind of confused by his use of that word self-leadership. So I asked him, what do you mean by self-leadership? And he said something interesting. He talked about self-leadership in the context of nervousness before present. And he said that nervousness is self-leadership. He said that self-leadership is having control over your emotions. And we see a lot of clients, or have seen a lot of clients over the past God knows how many. We've seen a lot of clients who think that having control over your emotions means that you are presenting like a robot, that you don't have any emotions. Yeah, you have so much control over your emotions that you don't have any nervousness at all. That's what they think. That's the initial way to think. But then I thought it was very interesting that immediately after he mentioned that having control over your emotions. Immediately after he mentioned that having control of your emotions is important, he started telling a story about his debate coach in high school and how the debate coach said that if you're not nervous, I don't want you up there in front of the group. I don't want you up there if you're not nervous. I thought that was interesting, that his example of having control over your emotions included being nervous. So I thought about that. We can edit out this silence. Oh, man.
The first one was the first swing of the train to the right. This is the swing to the left. The next, we may finally get off the track.
True. So when I dug into that concept a little bit more, I thought there are some good sources of nervousness and there are some bad sources of nervousness. Yes. Which ones would you like me to start with? Should I start with what Matt thinks are the bad sources of nervousness, or what Matt thinks are the good sources? Where would you like me to start?
Well, why don't you start with the bad ones, because I feel I can contribute to some of the good ones as well. So let's go with the bad ones first.
The first bad source of nervousness, of course, is not being prepared. And when we've told clients over the years that they need to be prepared for their presentations, a lot of times we'll get the pushback that, I do better when I'm unprepared. I do better because it makes me nervous, and so I'm not going to prepare at all. And that's just bad. People can see that from a mile away when you walk into a presentation unprepared.
Mm-hmm.
When you don't know what's coming next on the next slide, when you don't know how to explain your concepts, when you don't even know the transitions between one slide and the next slide, when you're unprepared like that, it's just bad. Nothing good comes of that. So that was the first and most obvious bad source of nervousness that came to mind. Some others that came to mind is not pre-talking to your audience. And on a recent episode, you and I discussed presenting bad news to people in general. Do you remember that?
Yes, and it was a significant part of it, the pre-talk, yeah.
Yeah, so not pre-talking to your audience is another bad source of nervousness. If you're nervous because you're going into the presentation saying, I'm going to present some bad news and I'm going to completely surprise my audience and I'm going to blindside them with this bad news, and I am hoping that they'll take it well, but I'm not quite sure how they're going to respond. If you're nervous because of that, that's also a bad source of nervousness.
It's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, it's a recipe for disaster. So bad sources of nervousness: number one, being unprepared; number two, not pre-talking to your audience to understand how they're going to respond to your potentially bad news. Good sources of nervousness are caring deeply about your topic. If you're nervous because you know that this topic is one of the most important topics in your life and one of the most important topics in the health of the company or the organization or whoever you're presenting to, if you know that the subject that you're talking about is extremely important. And if that's the source of your nervousness, that's a good source of nervousness. Would you agree with that?
Yes, of course.
Okay. Another source or another good source of nervousness is not having presented to this group of people before, this level of people before. And that's kind of a fine line, because just a few seconds ago, I said that a bad source of nervousness was not pre-talking to your audience. So like let's take an example. You're presenting to the board. A good source of nervousness, if you're presenting to the board, is like, I'm 9 million levels down below the board. I've never presented to the board before. I'm kind of nervous about presenting to the board. That's a good source of, if you're presenting to a group of people or to a level of people in the organization that you have not presented to before. But it's bad if you abuse that position by not pre-talking to some of the audience members. If you are presenting to the board and you're nervous because you have never talked to any of the board members ever before in your entire life, that's probably a bad sign. So pre-talk to some of the board members, give them a preview of what you're going to say. If you have some sort of two-way discussion about how to resolve a piece of bad news that you're going to break, find out how they're going to react to it. You don't have to talk to every member of the board, but do at least a few people in your pre-talk. Because when you walk in there, it's perfectly okay if you're nervous because you're thinking, I have never presented to the board before. But you want to at least to have pre-talked to a couple of them. Does that make any sense?
Yes. And the things that you talked about actually got me thinking as well. I think we have, I mean, based on the questions from the in the trainings that you and I received from the participants, most of them around the topic of nervousness are related to how do I avoid that? How can I reduce feeling nervous, excitement, or how can I control my nerves? How can I? It seems like it's something very negative, but at the same time, I'm thinking there could actually be benefits to feeling nervous during a presentation or even before that. And one of the things that comes to my mind is, and I'm a huge fan of this, by the way, for nervousness during the presentation. I think a certain degree of it can make you appear more human and relatable.
True.
I mean, I feel when I listen to a presentation of someone who is showing signs of nervousness, of course, it depends on the signs as well and the amount of it. But I think it's kind of breaks down an invisible barrier between the speaker and the audience, because now I am able to empathize with their vulnerability, and they have absolutely no problem showing. And I feel that this relatability, let's say, can even make me more receptive to their message. Of course, you and I talked about this before. I'm not talking the kind of nervousness that arises from a lack of preparation or not putting enough importance to the task at hand. I mean, as a presenter, it is one of your main jobs to be prepared enough. But when you do your homework, when you put in the time and effort to prepare to the best of your abilities, if you still experience some nervousness on the stage, I think you can actually use it to your advantage in the way of being relatable to the audience. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree with that, definitely. And in fact, I want to ask you a little bit more about that. So if I am, let's say that you're an audience member. You're an audience member and you see that the speaker is up there and the speaker appears to be a little bit nervous. What are some of the things that you look for? Because now so you see the speaker is a little bit nervous, and now you're deciding, okay, do I respect the speaker less because of this nervousness, or do I respect the speaker more? What are some of the things that you as an audience member, some of the things that would cause you to think, I respect this person more?
That's a good question. I don't know if this is valid for everyone, but it's certainly valid in my case as an audience member when I'm listening to someone deliver a presentation. When I spot the nervousness, first of all, I try looking at the root causes of it. Is it, like I said, a lack of preparation or not caring enough? If I spot that, then of course, that wouldn't be a respectable feeling on my side. But at the same time, I think we have ways of trying to deal with the nervousness on the stage when we are speaking. And some of us lean towards, I would say, cold indifference or even arrogance. Like, well, I don't care about this at all. I'm still nervous, but I don't care about it at all. That is one way of dealing with it, I think. And the other way is this is happening. Maybe I wish it were not happening, but this is happening. But I'm still going to go on, and I'm going to be vulnerable. I'm going to be open and transparent. And I'm just going to keep talking to you, and I'm going to deliver my presentation. Of course, at this moment, when I say transparency and openness, I'm not talking about starting your speech by saying, by the way, I'm very nervous. I'm sorry, I'm very nervous.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's not something that I want to hear the first time you open your mouth. I mean, you can be nervous, and I can relate to that 100%. But I don't think the first phrases coming out of your mouth is the way to declare that.
Okay.
So I think it's important how we handle that. Are we more in line with that cold indifference I mentioned, or are we more in line with the, let's say, warm embrace of the current reality of having some heightened nerves and still dealing with that, still keeping up with my presentation with the best of my ability? I think that's the difference between a respectable and a disrespectful reaction on my side.
Okay. And before we wrap up for the day, we've been zeroing in on nervousness, and I wanted to briefly touch on something else that seems to be related to the larger issue of self-leadership. We've been zeroing in on nervousness. So I'd like to zoom out a little bit back to the original topic of self-leadership. Self-leadership, another aspect of self-leadership that occurred to me is that self-leadership also involves leading yourself across moments of loneliness. And what I mean by that is that wherever you are in an organization, whether you're the CEO of the organization, you're leading the organization, or down a bunch of notches, whether you are leading a department inside of, or leading a team inside of your own department. So you're not even leading a cross-departmental team. You're just leading a team of people that you know very well and work with every day inside of your own department. Wherever you are in that spectrum, there's going to be a point at which you are alone, a point at which you alone have responsibility for the outcome of your decisions. You might, for example, what I mean by that is you might lead a brainstorming session that has, maybe the brainstorming session produces 5 great ideas, and all those 5 ideas are great, and no one would fault you for taking any of those 5 ideas. But at some point, you as the team leader have to pick one of the ideas and say no to all of the others. So at one point, you're saying yes to one and no to the others. And if the project fails, people are going to come looking for one person, and that's going to be
you.
So so no matter where you are in the organization, there's this gap of loneliness that you have to cross, and you have to cross it by yourself. And part of self-leadership is having the confidence in your decision-making ability to know that, okay, I am saying no to a bunch of, or 4 in this example, I'm saying no to 4 excellent ideas and saying yes to one of them. And I have enough confidence in that decision to make that decision. And if you don't have that confidence, then not only are you going to fail in your leadership role, whether it's, the team leader or the CEO leading the company, if you don't have that confidence, then not only are you going to fail in your leadership role, but you're going to fail in your presentation too. Because let's say that you're having a two-way conversation, and the group has a great two-way conversation. It's like that brainstorming conversation. They have a great two-way conversation where a bunch of great ideas are picked, but in the end, you're the one up there on stage, and the people in the audience are looking to you to make a decision, and you have to pick one of those great ideas. And if you don't have the ability to do that, then your presentation is going to fall apart too. So this concept of self-leadership is about more than just not being nervous. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. And I think it makes a lot of sense, actually. And I mean, before we finish, I think it's important to remember that nervousness will always take place.
Yeah, true.
And I think the moment we lose it, it will be game over.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, what's the point of going out on a stage, speaking to people without feeling any nervousness at all?
Yeah.
I don't know who it was. I think it was a famous director who said, I don't want to butcher the phrase, but I'm going to relate to it by saying, I think the day we stop feeling any nerves at all during a presentation, I think it's the time to call it quits and find something else to do.
Yeah, if you're not at least a little bit nervous, then You don't care enough the organization doesn't need you there. So
Yeah.
if you feel a little bit of nervousness, don't look at that nervousness itself as a problem. Look at why is that nervousness there, and maybe it'll be there for a good reason, maybe it'll be there for a bad reason. But the nervousness itself is not a bad sign. You should not see it as, I need to postpone this event because I'm still nervous.
Oh God, no. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So we should probably wrap it up around here, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I will see you next week then, and thank you very much, Alper. All right. Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to The White Rabbit with Matt Krause and Alper Rozanes. You can subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, iTunes, or through your favorite feed.